of the Never Lose a Deal podcast. Today, I am coming to you with the topic of is Gator funding predatory? Now, before I start, I know it's been a minute since I've did a episode here on the podcast. I did take a little hiatus for about a few weeks, so I want to I thought that if I, come back on, I wanted to really do a shock and awe when it comes to, the topic of what I wanted to discuss today. And so, what brings me to the topic of talking about Gator funding is because about a few weeks ago, I met with a local real estate attorney, I mean, not attorney, investor in my area, and her and she actually was telling me about this concept of Gator funding. And I'll be honest with you, for someone like myself who is in the funding industry, I was not aware, of Gator funding. And so, as her and I started to talk a little bit more about the topic, and I really got an understanding of it by listening to her and then doing my research, I said to myself, you know, this Gator funding thing, this is interesting. And I said, and when I did my research, I went back to her and I said, I know why this Gator funding topic was never really on my radar because it could be borderline predatory. But this podcast episode is not to knock um, Gator funding. Right now, on YouTube, there's, you know, lots of content on the topic of Gator funding, the pros, the cons, the do's, the don'ts. And I want to come with a different perspective. And the reason why I want to come with a different perspective is because Gator funding I don't want to, really go from the standpoint of should you use it or should you not use it. But let me give you a little context for those who are not familiar with the topic of Gator funding. So, Gator funding is pretty much a transactional form of funding in real estate. So, I'm very familiar with transactional funding. Transactional funding, in let me say, in the plain vanilla sense is usually funding that is used for A, B, C, D closing, or should I say A, B, and B, C closing. So pretty much it's used primarily in a double close. So you first you do a closing with one entity, and then during that same time, the funds are used to be able to transact to the next transaction. So I'm very familiar with that, and once again, that's a very, a very quick understanding of transactional funding. Now, of course, I'm not going to go do a deep dive on that. But Gator funding is a form of funding that is primarily used by a lot of wholesalers. So let me paint the picture for a lot of you. Now, of course, I know people are going to watch this and they're going to have their own ways of how they use Gator funding. But remember, this came from a conversation of an investor that I know, and based on her experience of how it's being used in this local area. Now, I don't know what's going on all across the country, but in this local area, is primarily being used by individuals who are wholesaling. So if you think about a traditional wholesaling transaction, or we're talking about clean wholesaling, I'm not talking about the creative ways of what people say wholesaling is, but it's not really wholesaling. Wholesaling, from what I understand, and I remember doing wholesaling. I first got started in real estate. I got started with wholesaling. So I understand what it is. It's your ability to be able to get a piece of real estate under contract, and you are going to sell that contract, usually on an assignment or another means. For me, I used to do a double close. So that's why I said very familiar with a transactional type of closing, because that's how I got started. When I got started back in 2008, when, if you think about 2008, that's when the real estate market pretty much tanked. You had Bear Stearns went under, you had Lehman went under, and that's when the banks got bailed out and you had TARP. So all these toxic assets that were on the books of these banks, a lot of them were real estate. So whereas you had some people who tell the story of, hey, I was doing well in real estate in 2008, the bottom fell out. Well, that's not my story. In 2008 is when I actually took off because I've carved out and figured out a way on how I could get started in real estate, being able to wholesale homes from the bank, REOs, real estate owned properties. Now, remember, this is exactly 2008. I know a lot of you all are saying, oh, you can't do a double close with a bank owned property. Well, this is before Dodd-Frank, because remember, Dodd-Frank took some time to come along. So I'm giving you a full picture, full context of where we are in the world. So in 2008, I took off. So I used to literally work with real estate agents, find bank owned properties. That was my bread and butter. I would find real estate bank owned properties and those that fit the criteria that I can be able to wholesale. I would put them under contract and then I would resell it to a rehabber. The reason why I say this is because I'm very familiar with how wholesaling works, especially when it comes with a transaction. Now, the thing is that this is where the Gator funding comes in. Because, like I said, this is a topic that is very popular right now. And in your local market, it may be being used different, but I'm going to talk about how it's being used here where I'm at, and that is in New Jersey. So, talking to the investor, and she was telling me that wholesalers who get properties under contract don't have the earnest money deposit to be able to secure the deal. Because, of course, if in order for you to literally have a security interest in a real estate transaction, you do have to put down some earnest money. Well, voila, that's where Gator funding comes in. So apparently, a lot of wholesalers who are new and getting started, they don't have access to funds. So what happens is that they go seek out Gator lenders who will literally give them the earnest money deposit. But of course, there's a cost attached to it because a lot of times they may want to put, 1,000, 1,500, 500 because of in a real estate transaction. Most of the time when you provide a higher earnest money deposit, you show that you're more serious than other buyers. So that is what these wholesalers are doing, hence the Gator funders. So the Gator investors, or should I say the Gator funders, these individuals who are funding the deals, that's what they do. They come in and they will front you the money to be able to secure your interest in the property. Now, of course, there's a cost to it. That is the reason why I decided to do this video because I want to give some context of things that people may have not considered and that, once again, I'm going to give you two sides of the coin because like I said, this is not a video or a podcast episode to really knock Gator lenders. Like I totally get it. If you want to build wealth in this country, there's two ways. You're going to build it with debt, you're going to build it with taxes. And I know that's a loaded topic, and I know it's not enough time for me to really talk about it now because that's not the discussion at hand. But understand, you are borrowing money to be able to secure your interest in real estate, and it has a cost. Now, the cost varies. If you put in Gator lenders, Gator funding real estate into YouTube right now, because as I stream this, although it's on a podcast, I'm also streaming it on YouTube. You're going to have all types of Gator lenders who have a whole they have a whole variety of interest rates that they charge. So it is not straight across the board one interest rate. But now let's think about it for a second. I'm not here to judge if the interest rate is predatory or not. because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what I say, it's what the state says, because there are usury laws. So let's just start there. So this is not what Lorelia thinks, what Lorelia's opinion is. This is because there are usury laws that every state has. But let's just say that the interest rates stay in the realm of the usury area of your state. Every state has a different usury law, so it's not straight across. And you pay this. Now that's the second part. So, if you're not familiar, so now that the wholesaler has the property under contract and they have the buyer, voila, they sell it, they resell it, and of course, the proceeds from them wholesaling it to a end buyer, they get the proceeds of what's left and whatever they worked out their assignment fee. Now, of course, if done correctly at closing, the amount that has to be paid to the lender, the Gator lender, comes out of the proceeds of what the wholesaler is supposed to get. Now, for some wholesalers, that may be a dream come true because they may be starting with nothing, and now they're seeing the opportunity to be able to really get started in the industry, do it the right way, because this way is being done right, is that they are securing property, being able to have a interest in it by putting a down payment or earnest money deposit. But this is where I want you to really go deeper on with the idea. If a wholesaler has to go to a Gator lender or Gator funding or get Gator funding, 9 times out of 10, the wholesaler is probably low on cash. They don't have cash readily available to them. And number two, they may not have the best credit because, of course, that's what I want to talk about next. If you do some research on what typical Gator lenders are lending in your area, like I said, it's not what Lorelia says. What are they lending in your area? And you start to really calculate, this is what the Gator lender is charging versus if I had access to some type of credit or any type of business funding, which one is cheaper? And the reason why I don't think a lot of wholesalers who are using Gator funding are thinking about that is because if you think about Robert Kiyosaki and the four quadrants, four quadrants with the cash flow quadrant, and he has the employee, the self-employed, the business owner, and the investor. I'm going to bet you that most Gator investors are operating from the B and the I quadrant. They understand money, they understand economics, and they understand that being the lender is much more profitable than being the borrower. That brings me to the point of the wholesaler not really understanding economics, because the biggest lie ever in real estate is that you need money to get started. And I know you like, whoa, 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 really, whoa, whoa, you always talking about funding. You've talked about business credit. So what are you talking about? You don't need no money. No, 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 no way, Jose. I have never been one to say you need those things to get started in real estate. That is a soundbite that has been really pushed on the internet airwaves. Why it's been pushed on the internet? Because I didn't even get started like that. So when I go back to my wholesale story and then I start to really unravel, well, how did you put the down payment down to secure your interest in a real estate deal? Because remember, you were buying from the bank. Well, I did it by building relationships without making this a whole wholesale class. I went out and figured out who were the buyers in the areas that I was looking to put properties under contract. Once I knew their criteria, what they were looking for, and then once I found deals on the MLS that I was going to put a contract on, Once I decided that this was a deal, I would use my end buyer's money, and I would have them to put their money down as a earnest money deposit. So my first wholesale deal back in 2008, I had to put, if I go through my storage and papers, I believe that contract I had to put down $1,500 or $1,000, something like that. That money didn't even come from me. That money came from the buyer who was buying the property. No money of mine out of pocket, but I was securing my interest. And because I had a relationship with the end buyer, it was a win-win because they clearly understood what I was doing. There was no peeking behind the curtain. It wasn't like, oh, I'm trying to fool you. They knew that my interest was only to wholesale and assign contracts. I had no interest in rehabbing and doing no fix and flips, where hence that's where they came in. Why do I bring that up? Because it goes back to not understanding the economics of real estate, because that is an example of what I just said. You don't need money. I was able to take something that someone needed, rehabber and buyer looking for inventory. Banks want to be able to take toxic assets off of their balance sheet. I'm the middleman and I know how to make this transaction happen. That's where I come in. It took no money from me to be able to do that. What it took was an understanding and knowledge. I say all that to say with um, Gator funding, the individuals who are lending to whoever, these investors, newbies, wholesalers, or whatever, they understand the economics. They understand that being a lender is much more important than being a borrower. I'm doing this podcast to give some type of context to those wholesalers who are using it, to say that it is very easy for you to transition from going back to the cash flow quadrant with the E and the S and the B and the I. Many wholesalers are either operating from the E or from the S. Some may not even be operating from either. With that being said, how easy could it be that, and I know, once again, I'm old fashioned, so most people are like, really, I didn't have no time for that. But do the economics on what it would cost if you were to really work on your own economics, meaning if you're a Gator a borrower, 9 times out of 10, I know the criteria. They have challenge credit, or they don't have no credit, or they don't have no money. But imagine if those Gator borrowers worked on their credit, worked on really understanding how economics work, and then looking at the cost of, will it cost me more? Because I've seen some of the interest rates that some of these Gator lenders that's doing videos on YouTube are charging. And when and my I'm not here to judge. Like this, like I said, this is not about, oh, Gator lending is bad. It's no, at the end of the day, I understand it. I mean, you've heard me on this channel. I've talked about the ability to be the bank by owning mortgage notes. So I understand that you being in the lending seat is a win-win. Oh, it is a win-win. But I really feel for the borrowers out there who don't understand economics. And really, that is the state of where a lot of people are in real estate, which is why you have on the internet the sound bites of people telling them that they need funding for real estate. Like that has never been something that I have stand on a soapbox for. I've always believed that funding is a leveraging tool that you use in addition to what you're doing. Not, no, I have nothing, and now let me just get a whole bunch of debt and credit or what have you and hope to get something, because that means you have no strategic plan. The strategic plan comes first. It goes back to what I said, and I'm just talking from my experience. When I said when I got started in real estate, no money, I understood that wholesaling was a way for me to get started in real estate, and I didn't have to use a lot of capital. And I knew that if I paired rehabbers or investors who are looking for inventory, and I looked for banks who had toxic assets on their books that they were looking to liquidate, I can be the in-between person to buy those assets and resell them to investors. Voila. That takes strategy. That doesn't take money. That takes strategy. That takes an understanding of the economics of what's going on. At that time, the economics in the country was that the narrative of the toxic assets, the subprime mortgages, banks are getting bailed out, but there's always an opportunity. So I say this as I end this episode of Is Gator Funding Predatory? I say it, if you do, it's only predatory if you do not understand the economics of the deal. And I know there's going to be people who are going to watch this video and they're going to say, oh, but I just needed some money. My thing is this: I challenge you. Please understand the economics of what you are doing in real estate. So once again, this is Lorelia. I'm signing off. I'll see you in the next episode of the Never Lose a Deal podcast. Until the next time, please, if you are watching on YouTube, look at the links below. And if you are listening on the podcast, please rate and let us know what you think about today's episode. Till the next time. Bye-bye.